Yeah.
Well, just so people know, watching overseas, like that is running from the south of Australia, like Adelaide, right basically up the middle of Australia, up to Darwin, and that's an internationally famous line that you were working on, where the GAN runs right through. And Trevor, we had on the other day, I think he actually drove. Was that correct, Paul? He drove one of the first GANs back from up there, or somewhere. He had photos he showed us.
Well, that's an interesting story because during the 2 years leading up to that line being built, or the line being completed, I should say, I was the SANT terminals manager, and it was the best 2 years of my working life in the rail industry, getting terminals operating in Darwin and Katherine and Tennant Creek, and employing people and getting training procedures written and all that and all that sort of thing. And just an interesting aside, the very first GAN passenger train that went from Adelaide to Darwin, which is, I think, February the 14th, 2004. Every driver in all of those locations wanted to work the train, obviously. So I thought, rather than have arguments with all these drivers, what I'd do is I'd have a competition where they had to write to me in 25 words or less why they should be the driver on that train. And my boss and I at the time, sorted through. And one guy, Mal Squire, who I'm still good friends with, he actually wrote a poem. Him and his mate Jeff McDonald wrote a poem and had it all framed, and it was
wow. Wow, that's great.
And I don't know who worked the train back, Andy, to answer your question, but the train that worked up to Darwin included a fellow called Graham Dardler, who was an Afghan descendant. His great-grandfather came from Afghanistan and worked in Maree and had camels, and then moved into when, of course, the railways came through and became more popular, the camels were no longer used. And so from his great-grandfather down through to Graham, he's still in the railways now in Port Augusta. He's a great guy. He was one of the drivers who drove from Port Augusta. And in the 10-year anniversary of that train in 2014, I was working at a different rail organisation, and I arranged for him to also be the driver on that 10-year anniversary one. So,
that's great.
Some things stick in your mind, and you're proud to be a part of that. It was a wonderful thing to have that line go through to Darwin.
Mm.
Oh gosh, yeah. And for those people listening, watching from overseas, the best way is to Google it, and Google the GAN, which is GHAN. It's quite an incredible trip. How many k's is that from
3,
Adelaide to Darwin? 3,000 k's. Yeah. Yeah. Oh wow, that's really cool. And can I ask you, Paul? Sorry, Mick. How long did you stay in the railways when you got back in again?
Another 14 years.
Wow.
Which was good. So I ended up doing like 25 years all up.
Wow.
And I enjoyed it. It's something that it gets in your blood. We travel, like my wife and myself, we've got a motorhome. We travel all over Australia, and it doesn't matter where you are. If they say, "Oh, what work did you used to do?" I say, "Oh, I was a locomotive driver in the railways," and they'd turn around. Everybody knows someone that's been in the railways, and they've got a railway story to tell, or and it doesn't have. It can be gangers, it could be station masters, it could be porters. It doesn't matter. Once you're in the family of the railways, you're in it for life. It gets in your blood, and I'm a bit like Paul. I'm not into model train sets and things. We got an old bloke here. Jimmy Rankin, he's got a model train set up in the old school in Haywood, so tourists come in, and he gets all excited about it, and he'll have a derailment and he'll pick it up and put it back on the track. And I said, it's not like that, Jimmy. But he actually was an old steam fireman. Guard. He went from a guard to a fireman on steam locos, and he's 83 now. But he tells stories after story after story. And it's good.
I'm sure.
But it's in your blood. And that's the thing that I've really sort of taken out of the railways.
Yeah, it's like I said before. It's something I find it's just always there, and I still love hearing the locos go past when me and Caden are filming, or seeing them over here. I go track a few trains over here every now and again when I'm out driving. And I'm going to ask you a couple more things before we finish. How different, Paul, because you were into a lot of the training, how different is the driving skill now compared to what it was like when we were in the job? Because we used to do all of that stretching the trains and air brake stretching and all that. What's different now?
Well, back in the day, if I'm referring to myself, no one actually physically taught me how to drive the locomotive. All of the tuition was done in the classroom, and then there was no proceduralized instruction, if you know what I mean. So if you had a driver who was happy to drive, you didn't get one.
Yeah.
But if you were fortunate enough, like me, to have a driver who was happy to not drive, then I drove all of the time. But there was no instruction about. I think the only thing I can remember being told was that the time sections from Mount Lofty to Mile End. You know, so it's 4.5 minutes to Upper Sturt, and then another 2 minutes along, all that type of stuff. But no train handling skills were passed on by any of these drivers. You just watch them. And if I made a mistake, and I can remember clearly a mistake I made once, and I lost my dynamic brake coming out of Carlington, I think it was. And I looked at, and the driver didn't say anything to me. You know, we lost our air. We were coming to a standstill. He didn't say a word to me. Nothing. And I had no clue. I didn't know anything about air pressures and absolutely no clue. Today's version of training is much, much, much different. And you get allocated a mentor driver, and there's copious amounts of information given to you on track topography and radio channels and a whole range of things. Which is just fantastic, Nothing like it was back in the day, and it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be like it. You know, we tell stories, you and I and Mick, about how, funny things that happened back in the day, but most of them were either unsafe or illegal in today's today's railway environment. It's so different.
For sure. Like some of the things that people got away with, which it was like I got in. My regular mate was Mick Stankovic, right? And I think we were two volcanoes sitting in the front of the cab, just waiting to go off, right? And he never talked to me. He didn't talk to me because I had an old mate. I forget what his name was, and we come down from Mount Lofty to Mile End, and I lost the expenses.
Oh, you don't want to do that, gee.
Oh no, I did, mate. That was it. Mick saw me. I was firing with him, and he went off. He said, "The guard told me you," and I went, "Oh, okay." He didn't talk to me ever again, mate. Like,